All right, welcome, Nicole. Thank you for joining me on Unleashing Light today. I have Nicole Sublette here from Manchester, New Hampshire, and I'm bringing her on just to tell a little bit about her story of growing up and the challenges of being a single mom and then finding her path and her purpose, and what she does now to help other women. So, Nicole, if you just want to share a little bit about maybe your younger years and then becoming a single mom, both the beautiful things and the challenges about that, and then how that kind of led into some more powerful work on your end.
Yes, thank you, Liz. It's such a pleasure to be here. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to share and express my story. So, growing up, I was originally born in Albuquerque, but I came to New England fairly young with my mom. And so she had married here and in New England. And so I'm biracial. And so growing up, I lived in northern New Hampshire for a good chunk of my life. And it was a really non-diverse area. So I always felt different, obviously, because I was the only person of color in my school. It was a very small school. And so, and there was a lot of trauma and chaos in my household, but I knew though I always wanted to work with people. And I think it was specifically the bond that I had with my mother. She had a lot of relationships and they weren't always the healthiest of relationships. Yet she would confide in me, and I'd also see a lot of her heartache. And, as children, I think we all have like special gifts. And I think as children, we tend to be really empathetic and really just magical creatures and just have this really beautiful and benevolent view of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And through just watching and observing her, I knew that my purpose, just very young, I think starting at age 4, is when I just knew I wanted to work with and support people.
Isn't
That was
it
my
so
journey.
interesting that as young as 4, we just really are so connected to ourselves and our purpose. And then as we go through life, it kind of gets lost a little bit and then it finds its way back. But you were talking about this special bond with your mom. And so can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we came to New England from New Mexico, my father did not come. So my father stayed in New Mexico. So a lot of times it was her and I. And I think my mom was a real role model for me as well, because she um in the first few years of my life, she too was actually a single mom. And even though she did not come from an impoverished background, she set off and branched on her own. And I remember her working a lot, and she actually put herself through school while I was just a little one. And so I just remember her working and attending school, and just even growing up, just watching her continue to grow. I mean, she's had so many iterations of her career. She's done amazing and powerful things. She's was a vice president of a bank. She has her MBA. And now she's actually living her dream. She's an author and has contracts to write, and she writes cozy mystery novels, and she makes a living writing. So she's been someone who's really pursued her passion.
Yeah. And so all of that push to kind of attend school, and it's so interesting just as a little kid, the things that you absorb and notice and that are impactful. And so when you were kind of like, okay, I'm a single mom and I need to figure out this path for myself, how did you start putting yourself through school and getting to where you wanted to be?
Absolutely. So when and I'm going to actually go back a little bit prior to
Sure.
single mother, which actually also led me on the path to where I am. Uh, I left home at 18. And as I said, my mom, I think due to, while she was a powerful woman, obviously had her own insecurities and a lot of not fantastic relationships. And there was a lot of abuse growing up that I experienced and witnessed. And so when I was at 18 and old enough to really emancipate myself, I left home, and I didn't want to really look back. I did have the value system of my mom being a strong woman, but I knew that I wanted to live my life a little bit differently. But meanwhile, though we have the best intentions to not be like our parents, sometimes we tend to follow in our parental steps.
Mhm.
And so I just remember after I left home, going to college, undergrad, almost did not even pass undergrad. I wasn't super enthused, and I actually didn't really, I was going to be like a map maker, which was definitely not my passion, but everyone's like, do something logical. And I was like, all right, I'll make maps. I mean, I have like the worst sense of direction. I have no business making maps. So I really didn't know. And I was lost. I knew that I wanted to help people, but even my mom, who was kind of business minded, and my family at the time, who the business minded, that's like, it's not practical. I wanted to help people. There's like, you can't study psychology. It's not practical. There's no money and psychology. Don't do it. Stay away from it. So I pursued geography, map making, and then I ended up working in travel for about a decade, which was nice. I got to travel.
Yeah.
And during that time, really to explore and understand myself.
Mhm. And you talked about too, just being the only person of color growing up and being in New Hampshire, biracial. Can you speak a little bit to what that experience was and what that taught you and how that maybe held you back or pushed you forward in different experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was younger, I really actually didn't understand what was happening in the context of racism that can actually play out in what we actually might call like microaggressions, which are a more covert form of racism to overt racism. And so I had some overt racist experiences growing up, but a lot of things were microaggressions that I experienced, and I didn't really understand. I didn't understand what was happening, because when you experience a microaggression, what happens is called an attributional ambiguity. What that means is something's happening, but you don't know how to put words to it. And I remember being very young, just going in elementary school, I would always be put, for whatever reason, because they would have different groups, and like A, B, and C, and
Mhm.
all the kids with special needs would be in the C group. And I remember always starting out in the C group.
Hmm.
I was always placed there, and there was never a rhyme or a reason. And what would happen was, when I was in the C group, I would do really well. I do exceptionally well. And then they would bump me up to the more advanced groups, but then I'd be lost because I didn't have the context.
Got it. Go ahead, continue just with kind of then how that impacted you from going to excelling and then moving and then struggling and being put in these different groups, and what did that really mean to you? Like, how did you conceptualize that as a young kid?
I think it was really tough because I didn't understand my place as a young kid. I just knew that I was different. And kids have, we don't always have, we don't really understand subtext or to what's going on. We can just really understand, to our limited knowledge, our experiences. And so for me, I think what was challenging about that is that what was being told indirectly, that there was like lower expectations of me, or because of the way that I looked, that there was lower expectations. I eventually had my IQ tested, and it turns out that I had a far above average IQ after these cycles. But also, I think another part of it too is that I was growing up in a context of trauma. We know that trauma impacts executive functioning. And I remember going to school, because I was also picked on and bullied in school, that no place really felt safe. And so I felt there was a lot of difficulty there, just being able to focus my attention. And it didn't look over. I wasn't a student that was, highly distracted or a lot of energy, but I do know, I think as far as like schoolwork goes, it was hard for me to focus because I was just looking for basic foundational needs of safety.
Yeah. So were they placing you in this group C of special needs solely because of the color of your skin?
I really cannot think of any other reason. Right now, as someone, I do diversity, equity, inclusion, and I train behavioral health centers, and I do a lot of work, and I speak on it. And so when I look back at the process and I really unravel it, there's no other reason.
Yeah, so you were never coded with like a learning disability or had any type of social emotional that was really impacting your intellect. It was, you look different, so we're going to place you here. And what age
Yeah.
were you when you were kind of starting to figure, I mean, was that much later in your years that you were kind of like, is that why I was there? At what point did that click for you?
I think it clicked for me when I was older, just looking back at my experience, because I really couldn't understand why. I never had a 504. I never had an IEP. I was just being placed in these lower groups. And so for me, it didn't make a lot of sense. And also when I went out of I did really well in high school. Actually, I was a straight A student, but when I went on to college and such, and when I'd write papers and do things, and even on to grad school, that I always found that I was above my peers as far as being able to write or do homework assignments, or the capacity to pick up on concepts and ideas really fast. And I always noticed that just as a student, I noticed that I was actually really fast and could pick up on things really quick.
So did that start to change the inner narratives? As a young child, it was like, why am I here? And I'm struggling here and I'm excelling here. And you've got obviously this one narrative as a young kid, whether you're conscious of it or not. And then you're getting older and you're like, oh, I see what was happening. Did that start to change the way you looked at yourself and how you performed in the world at that point?
I think it was when I was older that really started to change, is that I had an inward journey, just having to really face myself and who I was. And that kind of came later in adulthood. And so to give further context too, part of growing up, because there's a context of abuse, and so there's also these other messages as well that were really given to me, that they wanted me to do certain things, but also the same message was like, you'll never excel. It's just a way to keep me down, and to protect people from vicarious trauma. I'm obviously not going to share the details of the abuse, but it was pretty bad. And so as I became older, I think that's when I started to have a becoming. That's when I started to have an awakening to who I was, because I knew that the outside world wasn't actually bringing me joy. It was not bringing me happiness. And so it beckoned a deeper calling, like what is joy? What is happiness? And so for me, I think it was actually just a bit existential. It's just really trying to understand, seeing suffering around me, growing up in a context of suffering. I knew that there had to be a better way.
Mhm. When you talk about this inner journey, what did that take for you? What did you have to do to kind of really, like you said, face yourself and shift and kind of rise above some of the circumstances that were placed before you?
Well, what happened was it just became a culmination of stress, and it was an anxiety. And I remember at one point in my life, I was just completely anxious, always anxious, and I could not ever relax. And I became even agoraphobic. I was just overstimulated. And I think that was the combination of a lot of unhealed and untreated trauma,
Mhm.
working, going to college at the time, and also dealing with the chaos and trauma of my family as it was. And I just couldn't relax, and I didn't know what to do. And so I'd like try to exercise it out, or, like change my makeup, like, well, maybe if I, look better, and all these things on the outside, and nothing really helped. And it wasn't until I started to do an inward journey. I had actually lived in Denver, Colorado, and I saw this woman. Her name was Juanita Street. I still remember her. She wasn't even a therapist, but she did what was energy work. I didn't even know what energy work was then. And I remember she's like, I'm going through different areas of your body. And I literally saw, like, she was hitting different areas of my body. And I literally saw a rainbow. Come to find out, if we look at chakra systems, when she was at my root, like I was seeing red, and at my, my sacral orange and my solar yellow going on. And it's like, wow, there's something to this.
Mhm. It's so interesting. I think most people come to energy work having no idea what it is, and then they get it done and they're like, that is so powerful. So I know you mentioned agoraphobia, but I think there's a lot of people on here where like they're going, what's agoraphobia? If you can talk about maybe just a little bit about that experience, if that's still affecting you or how long it lasted for, and what that was like to live in that experience, and then maybe how some of the energy work helped with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So agoraphobia is when you have a fear of going outside. And it wasn't because I was afraid to go outside, is because outside felt overstimulating and overwhelming. And so when I look back at it, is that, we have our nervous system. We have the parasympathetic, is where we can rest and restore. And we have the sympathetic, which is the fight, flight,
Mhm.
or freeze response. And we're often in that when we're stressed out. And I think what was happening is that my nervous system, my sympathetic nervous system, was just overreactive, oversensitive. And probably my adrenals were crashed out. I think my body was just completely imbalanced. I
Mhm.
was out of balance. And so I just had this heightened sensitivity.
And so it's almost in a way, I mean, I don't know, but did that having the agoraphobia and keeping you from all these outside distractions, did that actually lead you into more of yourself because you couldn't be so distracted by the world? Or did that come later?
It it was painful. I couldn't, even though I was feeling this way, I still had to interface with the world.
Mhm.
And so even though I wanted to be inside, I couldn't. I still had to pay
So
my bills and work.
you did go out despite the agoraphobia. So you had the fears. A lot of times people just are not leaving the home, but for you, you did. And it was just a really intense fear.
It was a really intense fear, and it was just really, really overwhelming. And so because when we get to places that become so uncomfortable, those are really our greatest gifts, because that led me to the journey inside. And to answer your question, no, I don't struggle with agoraphobia, and I hardly struggle with anxiety. When I say that, I might be anxious if a situation merits anxiety, but I'm not um, anxious, or nor do I have what we'd classify as an anxiety disorder.
Awesome. Good for you. So, was it the energy work or some other holistic practices or counseling that helped with that? What did kind of move that through you?
So it started with the energy work, and definitely seeking counseling. I tried medication. Medication didn't work. It actually amplified it. It made it worse.
Mhm.
And so what moved it through me is that I really became curious, and I wanted to know more, and I actually wanted to know everything about healing, because I actually fundamentally understood that there was something in here. And being also a naturally intuitive person, being naturally intuitive since I was just very little, it's just something told me that there is something here, and that this is part of your story. And if you can really figure out how to unlock what's going on, then you can help to unlock this for a lot of other people as well.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned to me that you do work with a lot of other women, and that you're a doctoral student at this point. So maybe speaking a little bit about what you're educating yourself in now and how you're helping other women in the community, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a licensed psychotherapist. So I went to grad school for clinical mental health counseling. And that's, where I started to understand more of, how we function in the psychological realm. And also, and I love that field, but I also realized that being in the field for a long time, that talk therapy also has its benefits, but it also has its limits, because
Mhm.
one, how it was founded, but it really isolates the brain and patterning of the brain as separate from the body. And we know now that mental health conditions can be caused by so many things. Imbalances in the gut, or any imbalances
Yeah,
in the body can.
let's stop separating ourselves, right? It is one system. Yeah.
Exactly That's it. It's one system. And so I've studied a lot of things. So I've also studied I'm a clinical hypnotherapist because I also know that change is made in the subconscious realm, not the conscious realm.
Mhm.
And so because we can consciously say we want to do things, like if we're, let's say, on a diet, right? And then there's a cake in front of us and we're like, oh, you know what? I'm going to eat that cake. I know I'm on a diet. You know, when the saboteur comes up, right? That's because the programming in the subconscious isn't changed, or it's not fixed. And
Mhm.
so um, working in the subconscious realm is really helpful. So I'm trained in that. Working in the energetic realm, I'm a Reiki master. Oh my gosh, there's so many things. I'm so excited, but there's just so many things. And now I'm in the process of just studying the body and the body functions and alternate ways for us to heal.
Awesome. So Reiki master, hypnotherapy, and did you say biogenetics? Can you tell?
Bio,
Go ahead.
yeah, bioenergetics. And so it's really using the systems of the body to heal. When we're in a state of sickness or illness, our body's out of homeostasis. And what bioenergetic medicine does is it helps us bring our bodies back into what's called homeostasis and back into healing. And there's so many techniques. I'm also certified and trained in auricular therapy. What that is that in our ears, every single organ exists in the ears. And so we can use microcurrent microcurrent stimulus to, it's very similar to acupuncture without the needles. It's just microcurrents and doesn't have any pain, but we can stimulate certain organs in the ears. And so, and it's incredibly, incredibly effective.
Yeah, so I know people are going to hear that and go, what do you mean you can do all this from the ears? But there is so much with sound and vibration and just hearing frequencies, which is like, through the regular eardrum. And then there's the bone conduction, which is a totally different vibration, which is the vibration through the bone, right, as opposed to the eardrum. So if you were going to help somebody who is so confused on what you are trying to explain, can you just dumb it down a little bit and like maybe give an example of how it might work for a particular condition?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we think about our ear, right, and it's called somatopic, that it's like, it's almost like a fetus. If you were to put a fetus on the air, like the image of a fetus, like head down here, feet up here, you could place all the body parts in the ear. And so in the ear, there's a point in your ear, like a little dot that corresponds with your lungs, a little spot that corresponds with your heart. So for example, when I was sick due to the pandemic and I was having trouble breathing, I put the microcurrent stimulant on my lung points. And then 5 minutes later, I was able to fully breathe.
Okay. Yeah, and people who do get acupuncture know that there's like a ton of needles that go into the ears, but maybe don't know exactly what that's doing or why they're placing them there, but very similar. So
It's very similar. Yes.
yeah. Okay. So tell me a little bit about the work you do now and the women that you treat or help, and what you're really hoping to do after you finish this doctorate, if there's a new path for you.
Yes. So as I'm involved in the doctorate program, I'm already using what I have learned and really changing the way that we're using psychotherapy. And so right now what I'm doing is really holistic wellness with psychotherapy. So I have, when clients come in, I have the capacity to do bioenergetic scans, which is able to measure the systems of the body. So it can look at to see if we have toxic stress, if we're dehydrated, if we need more sleep. It can even chart what emotions we might be holding that we need to heal. So when someone comes in, we can get a good look at actually what is going on inside the body. And from that, we can look at maybe certain dietary recommendations or certain nutrient recommendations and go from there. And then using I have different technologies that I use. I have some sound frequency technology, right? Sound frequency technology, hypnotherapy, psychotherapy, of course. I have some devices that help to regulate the polyvagal nerve. And for people that don't know, is that when our polyvagal nerve is, for lack of a better term, out of balance, out of whack, is that we're kind of more in that trauma response, and it helps to relax that, because when we can relax that, we can feel more at peace and more at ease. And I'm also able to graph people where they're at using technology, using their emotions. I can show them on a graph, like, okay, you're down. Like if you're in the red, that means you're not in a good, happy, feel good state. So let's use the session to put you in what is called a green state. So they can see on a graph that they feel good, they feel peaceful, they feel happy. So there's actual quantitative, not just qualitative, but quantitative evidence that they're healing and improving.
Yeah, so you can track that. And is insurance covering some of the scans and the things like that? Or is that, I mean, we know how the system works, but is that something you're seeing insurance companies cover at this point?
Insurance companies do not cover that kind of work. And the thing though is with insurance companies, one, they dictate care, they dictate how often you could be seen, what kind of treatment you can receive. So it's super limited. And also, while I accept insurance for regular psychotherapy, I'm actually really trying to move away from insurance as well, because tying back to being a woman of color, when I see someone who is dealing with race-based traumatic stress, or, we're all being traumatized through incidents of violence in the media. If someone comes in, a person of color comes in, I'm not going to adjust them necessarily if they're being discriminated against or seeing it in society or experiencing it like I did. I'm not going to diagnose them with an adjustment disorder. I'm not going to say, oh, you're having trouble adjusting to racism, or you have an anxiety disorder because you're being discriminated against, because that internalizes the problem. It makes it, it makes it a them thing. And insurance companies force us to pathologize people, and not all people I see have a diagnosis.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I used to take insurance and do the same thing, and I stepped away from it because a lot of what people are experiencing is just being human, and it does not need a label. We do not need to make their experience wrong, or, put them on some code or whatever. So I'm so glad to hear more people making that shift and recognizing that and saying, there's a better way to do this. We don't have to take already a horrific experience that has happened and then label you on top of it. So I just think that's really great work that you're doing and trying to shift that as well. So going through all of your life experiences and going through all your education and training, what do you think has been the biggest challenge that you've had to face and overcome, whether it's been personal or work related or anything at all?
I think for myself, the biggest challenge that I have had to um, overcome is, I think sometimes it's the pressure of being a woman of color. And it's not even overcoming the challenge of that, is that it requires constant and consistent work and healing all the time. And so I have a very rigorous routine. I do daily qigong, daily yoga, daily walk in the woods, lifting weights, my nutrition. I'm very, I eat living foods. And so the plant-based living foods, just for in case anyone's asking. I'm not Ozzy Osbourne or anything like that. And so, and I think what's hard is that as a society, and for everyone now being in a pandemic and all the violence that's out there, Uvalde, or what happened on the 4th of July, I think the biggest challenge is that our nervous systems are so taxed. And I don't know, Liz, for you, but it's it feels like we're constantly having to rebound and work to reheal ourselves. Oh, we're getting through the pandemic, and then, something pops up.
Shooting, and then there's another racial, something going on where it's blasting people and re-traumatizing them. And yeah, but it's so nice to hear you say, as a practitioner, I'm doing all the self-care. I'm going for the walks, I'm eating healthy, I'm doing qigong, I'm taking care of my energy, which of course is obviously, deepening the connection to yourself, which allows you to help other people on a deeper level. So knowing that you're allowing yourself to give yourself so much love and self-care and to connect on a regular basis, what have you realized is the biggest truth about yourself?
What I've realized the biggest truth, and for me, it's actually not even about myself, is it's a universal truth because I've had such deep exploration with myself, is that we truly have the capacity to access expanded states of awareness. We all have this capacity. I know from someone who had struggled with really severe anxiety, which I never thought I could ever experience any kind of expanded state. I didn't think it was a possibility, or healing was a possibility, that when we can experience these states, we can actually really feel the connectedness of it all. And sometimes the dramas that we play out in the world and the society are, we come to realize that what we make big deals out of are just narratives that we've told ourselves that keep us down, that keep us locked in, and that we're not the narratives that we assign ourselves. We're not the self-doubt. We're not the lack of self-worth. I mean, that's all conditioned into us. And a lot of it's just false conditioning.
Right. So you obviously have had a big shift, and that's, been your experience now to go, that was just conditioning. I let all the other stuff fall away. And for somebody who is still really in that narrative of, really destructive self-talk, what would be like one piece of advice you would give to them to say how they can step out of that and just the very, very beginning stages?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had people there. I would really ask them to start to consider, where does it come from? And actually, the first thing I do when people come in with those narratives, I'm like, all right, let's just take off the pressure and kind of what I call breaking out of the matrix. Like, look at the magazines that you grew up with. Look at social media. Look at what you're being bombarded with. And do you see everywhere that there's always a message that you're never enough?
Mhm.
And you weren't born with that message. You weren't born thinking that. You were taught that. And when people can realize that they were taught that, it's amazing. I had one client, she was in a dermatologist's office, and we're talking about it, and she looked at me, she's like, Nicole, she's like, every poster, she's like, there's a Botox poster. And as this woman, it was like, you know, out with the old and in with the real you, as if saying like the eternal youth is really who you are. And all these this messaging that's completely disparaging toward women. And it's
Mhm.
just everywhere. But when we can just start to look around, like, oh, wait, it's not me. It's what I'm being told.
Yeah. And if I could be told that and I could believe that, maybe if I am told something else, I could believe that. And then I think you used the word curious, and you used it earlier when you were speaking too about, as you got older going through schooling, is like, I was just curious. And when we can get curious about ourselves and going, what really is the truth of me? That's, I think, where kind of this, expansion comes, and we're able to let some of that conditioning fall away and really grow. So, um, what's the biggest lesson you think you've learned through all of this?
The biggest lesson for me is that stay open and also stay connected. And what I mean by stay open is that, as we're talking about, is just be open to curiosity, to learn, and to always expand, because you'll always be surprised. And
Mhm.
also trust your heart and your gut instincts, because a lot of times we'll
Mhm.
do things um, that with our heads that our hearts would not tolerate.
Yeah.
And so trusting that heart instinct. And, I'm so glad I went into psychology, because as I said, I'd be making maps, and, you and everyone else would be like driving in lakes as we speak. So
That's so funny. Well, I'm glad you went into this field and really were able to live out the little 4-year-olds knowing of the gifts that you have, and really leaning into that so that you can share it with the rest of the world. And I will certainly provide your contact information in the links below when I am able to put this up, and so that people can reach out and find you, because I'm sure there's going to be something that you've said that's resonated with them and their story, and they're going, I think that girl can help me, so that's really the point of all this, is to help us grow, to encourage each other, and help us all rise up together. So I am so thankful for you sharing your story. Is there anything else that you wanted to add before we wrap up, or?
No, I don't think so. And I want to thank you though, for your inquisitiveness and your curiosity, and also providing a platform for women to share their stories. I think it's just really incredibly important. And so your energy is just really amazing and incredible. So I just want to like honor that as well, and just express deep gratitude for you and what you're doing as well.
Thank you so much. I am so happy that you're able to join me here, and hopefully we'll have you back at another time, and to share a little bit more on different things. So thank you so much, Nicole. Hope you have a great day.
Yes, thank you. You as well.